Welcome ladies and gentlemen to a Nomad in Gameland. This is a video guide on a quick and easy way to beat your very first run in Balatro. If you already know how to beat Anti-8 and want some more in-depth advice, I'm afraid that this might not be the video for you. However, if you're new to the game or are just struggling to get a decent start, this guide will explain how to beat the game without any unlockables and maybe even on your very first attempt. I'm going to begin by running through the basics of the gameplay loop itself, so if you're already familiar with how the game is structured, feel free to skip to the next part of this video. Right, let's jump straight to it. In Balatro, you need to play poker hands in order to score chips. I'm not going to teach you how to play poker, but you can look at the run info panel on the left hand side of the screen, which explains each hand type. You have a certain amount of hands to play per round, and you can discard a certain amount of cards from the deck each round too. Without unlocking anything, this will be 4 hands and 4 discards. You can play 5 cards per hand, but not all of them will necessarily score, just the ones involved in the actual poker hand you're playing. You can also use consumables which can be bought at the shop, and I'll talk about this later. Now when I said you have 4 discards, that means you can discard up to 5 cards 4 times, not that you can only discard 4 cards. Every round, or as the game calls it, every blind, there's a target amount that you need to reach in order to proceed in the game. After reaching that target, you beat that blind and you'll get some cash. This is not to be confused with the chips that you actually score. You can get extra money per blind if you beat the blind in fewer hands. There are 3 blinds or rounds per ante or level, 2 regular blinds and 1 boss blind. The boss blind will have a power up of some kind, and if you beat the boss, you move up to the next ante or level. If you beat Anti-8, you win, although you can continue on to endless mode, but for the purposes of this video, the game will end after you finish Anti-8. In between blinds, you'll have access to a shop where you can purchase items, things like cards, packs, and vouchers. These are randomly selected every blind, so there's going to be an element of luck as to what's available here. The shop is one of the most important places in the game, and we need to know what's available to buy. So let's talk about the cards first. There are 2 types, jokers and consumables. Jokers are the most important part of this game. These are cards that you can collect and they give you buffs, but they can't actually be part of the poker hands you play, they just enhance them. This could be something like giving you extra chips per hand, or extra cash at the end of the round, or by increasing your multiplier for the hand. I'll talk about all of these concepts later in the video, but just know for now that jokers make or break your run. Having the luck to draw the right joker at the right time will be essential to making sure that you can beat the game. And as a default, you can hold up to 5 jokers at any one time. Moving on to consumables, as you probably guessed, these are cards that you use on a one-off basis. Let's start with planet type cards. These level up individual poker hands themselves and increases how much each one will score. They can make quite a big difference, and I've had multiple runs where I would score more chips playing a high card than something like a full house because I've leveled up that high card through planet cards. Again, you can see what level each poker hand is during a run and how much they will score per hand on the run info panel on the left hand side of the screen. Another type of consumable that you can purchase are tarot cards. These vary in their effects, but they provide buffs either to your playing cards or to you more generally. For example, they may give you the option to increase the chip value of one of your playing cards, or they might just offer you cash. Enhancing your playing cards can be very effective, and I'll touch upon this concept a bit more in a second. Spectral cards are like tarot cards, except they're a bit more broad and they often have serious trade-offs. For example, they may offer you 4 enhanced cards in exchange for deleting a random card. Or it might make a copy of one of your jokers at random but destroy all the others. Now, cards are sometimes offered for sale at the shop individually, but you also have the opportunity to buy packs instead. For example, a basic buffoon pack allows you to pick 1 joker out of at least 2 types of joker. A celestial pack allows you to pick 1 planet card, an arcana pack allows you to pick 1 tarot card, and spectral packs allow you to pick a spectral card. There's also a standard pack which allows you to pick regular playing cards to add to your deck. Now before I move on to the last type of consumable, I need to talk about enhancements, additions and seals. You have the chance to get modifiers to your jokers and playing cards. Playing cards can get enhancements and seals. These buff your cards for the rest of the run unless they're deleted or removed somehow. For example, you might have the opportunity to add bonus chips to a certain card, or make it into a gold card which gives you an extra $3 if you hold that card until the end of the round. I won't go over all of these as you can find the information about them in the collection tab in the main menu. Both playing cards and jokers can get additions. Foils give 50 extra chips, Holo gives a plus 10 multi, Polychrome gives a 1.5x multi, and a negative gives an extra joker slot. When held by your jokers, they can make even a mediocre one somewhat effective. Now, the last type of item and consumable from the shop are vouchers. Their effects last the entire run, and because of that, they're a little bit more expensive at $10 each. An example effect would be having one extra hand to play until you lose, or one extra discard. Now, access to the shop is only available in between blinds. You can't go back there at will. The reason I bring this up is because you can skip the regular blinds per ante. Each skip will give you a tag, which is another small power up or buff. And these can be either immediate or only trigger after a certain event, for example beating the boss blind or reaching the next shop. The cost of skipping is missing out on the revenue from the blind, missing access to the shop, and missing out on any other benefit that you might receive from actually playing your hands. These are serious trade-offs, and so in most circumstances it is not a good idea to skip blinds. One last thing I want to mention with the gameplay loop is interest. It's a small point, but if you don't spend your money, you will earn $1 per $5 per blind on interest, up to $25. For example, if you've got $25 in the bank and you move on to the next blind and you beat it, you will earn $5 in interest, in addition to what you earned in the blind. Now bear in mind, there are certain jokers and vouchers that can increase this value. Sorry, I know there's a lot of information I've just given you in a short space of time, and it's probably better just to play the game for a bit and you'd get a better idea of all of this than can be explained in this video. But if you can wrap your head around how to play, what you need to do, and the types of cards and buffs at your disposal, let's move on to the main mechanics of the game, which is how to score chips and the maths behind it. You will need to use poker hands in order to score chips. The better the hand, the more chips you'll score. You can see what each type of hand will score on the run info panel on the left hand side of your screen. Now to determine the score of each hand, Balatro uses two values, a chip value and a multiplier value. You've probably already guessed it, but the amount of chips you score will be these two values multiplied. For example, a pair has a chip value of 10 and a multiplier value of 2, so it will score 10 times 2, which is 20 chips. On top of that, the cards involved in each hand will also score chips. For example, let's say we play a pair of 5s. Both of these 5s will obviously score 5 chips, a total of 10. This will be added to the chip value for the poker hand. So a pair is worth 10 times 2, the 5s are worth 5 each, so 10. So in this hand, the chip value will be 10 from the pair, plus 10 from the 5s, which is 20, and the multiplier was 2, so the total chips scored for this hand will be 20 times 2, which is 40. Now let's do another example just so we're clear. Let's say you have a flush with a king, queen, jack, 8 and a 2. Faces score 10 each, so that's 30 from the faces. And 8 and 2 is 10, so another 10. So the total chip value just from the cards scored in this hand is 40. A flush itself is worth 35 times 4. So the total chips scored in this hand will be 40 plus 35, which is 75, times 4, which is 300. Now just as an FYI, aces score 11, not 10 like faces. Now you can always play 5 cards, irrespective of the type of hand you end up with, but only the cards involved in the poker hand itself will score. For example, if you play a pair of 5s, but also play another 3 random cards aside it, like an ace, king and a queen. Only the pair of 5s will score, not these other random cards. As we progress in the game, the amount of chips we need to beat each blind increases, and so in order to win, we need to increase both the chip values and the multiplier values in order to keep up. To do this optimally, not only do we want these two values to keep increasing, but it would also help to have these two values increase at the same rate, or be as close together as possible. Let me explain. Let's say we have a simple sum of 10 times 10, which is 100. If we increased one side of this equation by another 10, we would have 20 times 10, which equals 200. However, if we increase both sides of 10 times 10 by 5, so we'll end up with 15 times 15, this will equal 225, which is actually bigger than 20 times 10. So only increasing one side of 10 times 10, we would need to increase it by 13 in order to beat the balanced approach. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect, but there can be a rather large imbalance if you only focus on one side of the equation. Look at this graph. This is how many chips we could be leaving off the table if we only focus on chip amount or we only focus on multipliers. We can still win by focusing on one side, but the amount by which we would need to increase that side would become increasingly disproportionate to what we could achieve if we increase the other side by a similar amount. The problem is that chip value is much easier to raise than the multi-value in Balatro. So while the maths might say one thing, the game has other ideas. The good news is that we can achieve more than 95% of the optimal balanced result if we have a 3:2 ratio between our chip value and our multi-values. For example, if we have a 120 chip value with an 80 multi-value. The better news is that we can achieve about an 88% efficiency with a 2:1 ratio, so something like 135 chip value and a 65 multi-value. And the best news is that we can maintain 75% efficiency with a 3:1 ratio, so 150 chip value and a 50 multi-value. On the back of this, my advice would be to aim for at least a 2:1 ratio between your values. Getting a 210 chip value and 105 multi-value by NT8 is definitely achievable. And along with scoring cards and the poker hands themselves, this should just about be able to get you over the line. A word of caution here though. If you can massively and disproportionately increase your chip value or your multi-value, do it. It won't be as efficient as if you kept this equation balanced, but it still might be more effective depending on your run. For example, let's say you got a chip value of 120, but your multi is only 40, so a 3:1 ratio. If you then have the option to boost your chip score by another 100, or boost your multi by 15, obviously go for the chips. It would be less than if you were able to boost your multi by 40, but you can only work with what the game gives you. But what the maths is saying to us is, if you had a choice instead to get an extra 50 chips, or to boost your multi by 20, it would actually be better going for the multi, even if the amount of the boost is low. I hope that makes sense. Now, I am going to get a bit mathy for a second, and it's really close to pointless to discuss this. So honestly, feel free to skip ahead to this point. You're really not missing out on anything important. I'm only going to talk about the maths here because it's interesting to me, rather than actually being useful to playing this game. If you do want to hear some maths here, then it's important to know that the higher and higher our chip and multi-values get, the higher the amount we'll be potentially missing out on, the more imbalanced they are. The amount our build is missing out on will be the average of the chip and multi-values squared minus the difference from the average squared. So as the values increase, the missing potential will get exponentially higher depending on the difference between your chip and multi values. Let me show you the method. And for this method, let's say C is equal to chips, M is equal to your multi, A is the average of your chips and multi, and D is the distance your chips or multi values are from the average. So the average, A, can be calculated as chips plus multi divided by 2, or C plus M divided by 2. And D, the difference, can be calculated as chips minus multi divided by 2, or C minus M divided by 2. It can also be explained as C minus A or M minus A. One of those will be negative in this instance, but it doesn't really matter. Now, to find the optimal value, all we need to do is square A, the average. So the optimal value will be A squared. To find out the missing potential, all we need to do is minus our actual value, and that can be easily calculated by multiplying chips by the multiplier, so CM. So what we need to work out is a squared minus cm. So we know that a is equal to c plus m over 2. So if we get c plus m over 2 squared, that is c plus m squared over 4. And we still need to minus the cm, so we can simplify this by saying cm or 4cm over 4. Now this whole equation's over 4, so we can simplify and blah 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 blah. What we end up with is c minus m squared over 4. Now let's leave that value there for a second and go to d, the distance from the average. We know that is c minus m over 2. And if we square d, we get c minus m squared over 4, which is the same as a squared minus cm. So if we know that d squared is equal to a squared minus cm, cm is also going to equal a squared minus d squared. Now, you can see that both a and d are square numbers, so they will increase exponentially. The higher our chip and multi values get, the more we will be benefiting from them being closer together, for the difference between them to be smaller. But please don't lose sight of what actually matters here. Any increase in C or M, so our chips or our multiplier, will still make the chip score go up. And that's all we need. Anyway, that's enough useless math. Let's get back to the useful information. Beyond this, there's actually another number we need to consider, which is the multi-multiplier. We can get cards which will multiply our multiplier by another multiplier. Again, in a theoretical world, it will be great to get this as close to the other values as possible, but that's just not going to happen. We should still try to increase this value as high as possible, most usually in the later rounds. For example, let's say we got a chip value of 100, a flat multi of 100, and a multi-multi of 1.5. This would score 15,000. Without the multi-multiplier, we would need to increase either the chip value or the flat multi by 50 in order to match this, or roughly 25 on both sides. If the multiplier was 3x instead, it would score 30,000, and we would need to increase the chip value or the flat multi by 200 or 75 each to match it. So as you can see, a relatively small multi-multiplier can go a long way. But there is a massive caveat here. Multi-multipliers work best when the flat multiplier is high. At lower rounds, the flat multiplier can be increased much more quickly than the effect of the multi-multiplier. For example, let's say it's early on in your run and you've got a flat multi of 4, and you've got a choice now between another flat multi of 10 or a multi-multi of 2x. Taking the flat multi will get you to 14, but taking the multi-multi will only get you to 8. So in the short term, the flat multi is the better option. However, in the long term, as your flat multi gets higher and higher, the multi-multi will be far superior. The impact of the multi-multi does start to get weaker the bigger it gets, but it's still goddamn strong. I think to get a decent result, we should be aiming for at least 3.5x. It's great if you can get higher, but don't worry too much if you don't. One thing to note is that multi-multipliers work independently, as in, if you've got two 3x multipliers, this will act to multiply the flat multi by 9 and not by 6. An incredibly important thing to note here is that the order of your jokers makes a difference. They will trigger left to right, so you want to place all of your flat multis towards the left hand side and all of your multi-multis to the right hand side. Do it the other way around and you might end up with a drastically reduced result. So that's a quick rundown on the maths needed to start planning our approach. But before we start talking strategy, let's quickly look at the last boss blind on Ante-A. Typically, you'll need to score 100,000 to win, although there is a chance you'll need 300,000 if you get the violet vessel. Let's assume you've got 4 hands to play. That means you'll need to score 25,000 per hand to win, or 75,000 for the violet vessel. Not considering the multi-multiplier for now, you will roughly need the chip value and flat multis to be 160 each to win against 100 grand. I think a 200 chip value is a decent target to aim for on any run. However, even with a 200 chip value, you'll still need to get your multi-value to above 100. It's doable, but a little challenging. If you've got the misfortune to get the Violet Vessel though, you're really not going to be able to win without a multi-multiplier. Having a decent multi-multiplier here can drastically reduce how much is required for the final boss blind, even a small one like 1.5x. Sticking with the 200 chip target for a second, a 1.5x multi-multiplier reduces the flat multi requirement for the standard boss blind from 125 all the way down to 84, and a 3x multi takes it all the way down to 42. In most circumstances, if you can get around a 200 chip value and around a 100 flat multi value with a 3x or a 4x multi value, your run is gonna be an absolute walk in the park. Anywho, we've got all the relevant maths out of the way now, let's talk strategy. So our strategy to win here is going to be fairly simple. We want to get our chip value, flat multi value, and our multi values as high as possible. We want them to be so high that it doesn't really matter what cards we play. In fact, if we do it right, we should be able to get away with just playing a high card every hand. As a quick reminder, this is a guide to help you win a run for the first time, so I'm only going to be talking about cards that you can get without unlocking anything. The very first thing we should try to do is get our flat multi up. It doesn't matter if it's a temporary fix or something we can build on, we just need something to help us keep beating blinds and keep returning to the shop. If we can get a decent multi, like plus 10, plus 20 or something like that, we'll move on to something that can get our chip values up. The ice cream and popcorn jokers work quite well here, but they are super temporary fixes. These will help us to keep beating blinds without trying, so we can make money and save up for buying jokers. If you can, try to avoid getting jokers that rely on you playing certain hands. The only exception here is the droll joker, so the one that gives you a plus 10 multi for playing a flush, but that's still only going to be a temporary fix. If you can't avoid them, get what you can get, but remember we're going to have to replace them as soon as possible. Here are some jokers that do well at the beginning of the run. Let's start on the flat multi end, as this is going to be our priority to get up. The half joker, it's a plus 20 multi if you play 3 cards or fewer. Super limited, but should help you at least in the first couple of blinds. The mystic joker, you need to use all of your discards, but once you do, you'll get a plus 15 flat multi per hand. The misprint joker, it randomizes a flat multi, but it can go up to 23, so fairly high. The raised fist joker, it doubles the lowest card in your hand and uses it as a multi, so it ranges from 4 to 22. But bear in mind that if your card is debuffed, then I don't think you'll get a multi here. The abstract joker, this gives you plus 3 multi for every joker that you have, so it can quite easily get your plus 15 multi. The, I don't know how to say this, gross Michelle, this gives you plus 15, but there's a 1 in 6 chance that it will be destroyed at the end of the round. I mentioned this one earlier, but the popcorn joker, this gives you a plus 20 flat multi, but it will decrease by 4 every round played, so it will become useless pretty quickly. Right, let's move on to the flat chip value jokers. Banner. This is actually really good and can be taken all the way to the end of your run. It gives you 30 chips per remaining discard. So if you haven't used any discards, it's going to give you a plus 120 chip value. And with the wasteful voucher, which gives you an extra discard, this joker will net you 150 per hand. The blue joker. This one can also be taken fairly far. It gives you plus 2 chips for every card remaining in your deck. So it starts at around 88 chips at the start of each blind, and then will decrease as you play more cards. Now this is technically a scalar, and I'll talk about scalars in a sec, and will get higher the more cards you add to your deck. But I've added it here because it does start with quite a high value. Ice cream, I mentioned this earlier. This gives you 100 chips, but decreases by 5 every hand played, and so will disappear fairly quickly. So those are the flat chip and multi jokers that you want to be on the lookout for in the beginning of a run. On top of that, you might also want to start thinking about your bank balance. While you should definitely not be shy about spending your cash, don't spend it needlessly and sell jokers that aren't doing anything. By earning interest, you are increasing the amount of cash you'll have to spend on other jokers, vouchers, and cards that might come in more handy. You might also want to consider some jokers that will increase your cash, like the credit card. Well, this one doesn't actually increase your cash, but it does allow you to go $20 in debt. I see this one as a bit of a last resort. Delayed gratification. This one could be quite powerful and used quite far into the run. If you don't discard any cards, you'll get $2 per discard left. So that's usually about $8 per blind. And if you've got the wasteful voucher, this will go up to $10 per round. And this adds up pretty quickly. The egg. This one gains about $3 in value every round. So think of it as earning an extra $3 per round. Bear in mind though that the value of this is in the sell value, and that is not going to earn you interest. However, the golden joker might do because it will net you $4 per round. Not only is this a higher amount than the egg, but again will also add to your bank balance, allowing you to earn interest. To the moon. This is decent if you've reached the interest cap, as it doubles the amount of interest you can earn, effectively earning you an extra $5 per round at the interest cap. Now, having excess money is useful as it gives you the freedom to take more risks in opening packs and can also buff certain jokers. While you shouldn't be shy in spending your money, you should still take steps to maximize what you have. Moving on, by ante 2 or 3, the flat jokers that we've collected might not be able to do any more of the heavy lifting. So in the meantime, we need to look for a permanent solution. And what we need are scaling cards. Certain jokers will scale depending on certain requirements. For example, the square joker will get +4 chip value every time you play 4 cards, exactly 4 cards. The more times you play exactly 4 cards, the higher the value of this joker will become, and this will help us as it increases over time. The same with the flat multi-value. The Ride the Bus joker will increase the flat multi by 1 every time you play a hand without scoring a face card. Over enough hands, it's more than possible to get this to 50 or 60 by ante 8. We should try to get these scaling cards at the same time that they have some cover with the other flat cards. And by the time they've caught up, because they usually start from 0, and become useful, we can remove the flat cards either for multi-multis or whatever else the run requires of us. I'd suggest starting with the scaling multis before moving on to the chips, but the run might have other plans for you. Here are some good scaling multi-cards. The Supernova. This is a powerful card that uses the number of times a poker hand has been played as the multi. Once I get this card, I almost always just start playing the high card as a hand to level it up, if I can. Of course, don't just lose a blind to level this up. The downside is that if you play a hand you haven't used much, your multi is going to be much lower. You might get caught out by a boss blind that doesn't allow repeat hand types. Ride the Bus. I talked about this one earlier. It gives you +1 multi every time you play a hand without a face card. Obviously the downside is you no longer have access to higher scoring face cards, but to be honest, it's rather easy to level this one up. The Green Joker. This gives you +1 multi every hand or -1 multi every discard. Again, easy to level up, but the downside is you basically can't discard any more cards. Now the jokers I just mentioned get stronger per hand played, but if they're too strong, it can actually be a little bit hard to level them up, as you might win the blind in one hand. These next two rely on having some extra cash, although indirectly. The Fortune Teller gets +1 multi for every tarot card you use, so you need to spend money to level this one up. However, getting tarot cards can be quite useful to level up your deck as a whole, so at least you get a double benefit. Besides the expense, the opportunities to buy Arcana packs or tarot cards can be dependent on what's available in the shop, so you might not be able to level this one up for a blind or two at a time. The Red Card. This gains +3 multi for every skipped pack, so you have to buy a pack and then skip it. Not only is this expensive, it's wasteful. It wastes what could otherwise be useful cards, but the trade-off here is that it gives you a +3 multi rather than a +1, and so you could potentially get boosted by +6 per blind. Right, that's enough of that. Let's move on to scaling chip value jokers, but before I do, I need to say that some of the flat chip value jokers might be able to take you far enough. For example, If you've got the banner joker and you've got an extra discard, this is going to be getting you 150 chips per hand. You might not even need a scaling chip joker. Remember the math and decide whether you'd be better off investing in an extra scaling multi to reach equivalence. Anywho, here are some good scaling chip jokers. The square joker. As I mentioned earlier, this gains plus 4 chips per hand when you play exactly 4 cards. This can scale really quickly and doesn't generally conflict with any other jokers. The bull joker. This is one of my favorites and can often allow you to completely disregard the maths. It gives you plus 2 chips per $1 you have. It's really no trouble to level this joker up to plus 200, plus 250 chips alongside the other money building jokers, and it can be seriously powerful. However, if you've got other cards that rely on you spending money, this might take some more management, but you still shouldn't have too many problems. The castle joker. This is another one that can get seriously powerful. Every blind it will change, but you can gain plus 3 chips per discarded card of a certain suit. So if you discard 3 club cards and it applies, you'll gain plus 9 chips. This can build really quickly, but it isn't compatible with jokers like the green joker, as that will go down by plus 1 multi for every discard. Now, while scaling cards can get you very far indeed, the cherry on top will be your multi-multipliers. These will further multiply your flat multis, leading to rather large numbers. I typically prioritize getting the flat multi up to around about 30 before I even start to worry about getting a multi-multiplier. However, if you have the cash and the opportunity to get one before then, it might still be worth getting. Now, there are 2 flavors for these jokers too, flat and scaling. However, because of their impact and when we prioritize getting them, which is the end of the run, flat multi-multipliers are still great choices and at times might even be better than getting some of the scaling ones depending on how much time you have left. Now, here's what to look out for. The blackboard. This is a flat 3x multi-multiplier and it's rather good. You just need to make sure that all the cards that you still have held in your hand are either spades or clubs, so all of the black ones. And this only applies after the hand is actually played. So if you play all red cards but the remaining cards in your hand are all black, then this joker will trigger. The blackboard joker can work quite well with the square joker, as playing 4 cards at a time can help shift more red cards out of your hands. It becomes more difficult with cards like Ride the Bus, where you'll be punished if you play any face cards, and you may end up having to use your discards, so something to bear in mind. Now, blackboard is also a bit tricky with the green joker. Again, if you need to discard cards, the green joker might scale down. The constellation joker. It starts at 1 but scales and adds 0.1x for every planet card used. It's a bit of a slow burner but can build up pretty high over time and is fairly cheap to run. The card sharp. This is a flat 3x multi that will trigger if a poker hand has already been played in a particular blind. It's quite simple to implement, it doesn't really conflict with other jokers. However, it does take at least 1 hand to be played in order to trigger. So make sure you're not solely reliant on this card, just in case you come up to a boss blind that only allows 1 hand to be played or no replays of certain poker hands, as this joker will never trigger in those boss blinds. Vampire. I'm not a massive fan of this one, but it can do the job. It's a scalar and will gain 0.1 every enhanced card played. The problem is that it removes the enhancement, so it becomes essentially another expense card. It's more of a last resort for me, but can definitely work. The hologram joker. This is probably my go-to. It's a scalar and it increases by 0.25, a quarter, every time you add a playing card. So it is an expense card, but it doesn't conflict with other cards and is still fairly cheap to level up. And it works quite well with the blue joker. Ramen. This is a simple flat 2x multi-multi, but it loses 0.01 per card discarded. Because of this, you should be careful when using it with the castle joker. But other than that, it's a pretty decent card to go for, even if it doesn't scale. Baseball card. This one is okay and really depends on what else you have. It gives 1.5x for every uncommon joker you have. The only uncommon flat chip jokers that I have recommended are the castle joker, the bull joker, and the to the moon joker. All the other uncommon jokers I have recommended are multi jokers, like the blackboard, card sharp, vampire, hologram, ramen, and constellation. So I'd really only recommend baseball card as a second multi-multi. Now, that's not all the cards that could prove to be useful, but these are my go-tos. Another suggestion I have is to consider how each of these level up and try to have some variety. For example, if you've got a scalar that increases per hand, it might also be useful to have another scalar that increases by a different method, for example per discard, or that increases with money. As your hand scalars get more powerful, as in jokers that scale every time you play a hand, you might end up with fewer and fewer opportunities to level them up, because you might be one hit KOing the blind. Being able to have a joker level up in a different way becomes a way to diversify your risks, right? Just make sure your jokers don't conflict though. One joker that works really well with hand scalars is the burglar joker. This removes all the discards you have, but does give you 3 extra hands. So not only does this allow you more hands to level up your hand scaling jokers, extra hands also make it much easier to beat the run because you have lower chip and multi requirements. With 7 hands, you only need about 60 on each side of your chip multi equation and you should be fine. And that's without a multi-multi. Right, that's finally all of the joker talk out of the way, but it's useful to remember that jokers make or break a run. That is why the game is named after them. Jokers should always be your priority. Each run you should get a flat multi first, then a flat chip joker, then focus on getting scaling chip and multi jokers, and then once you've got 30 or so in your scaling multis, focus on getting a decent multi. And this should get you 99% of the way to beating a run for the very first time. Now, aside from that, once your jokers are sorted, you can look to other ways to boost your run, namely other cards and vouchers. Let's talk vouchers first. These are $10 each and only one type is available per ante, so they're going to be 8 in total for you. But let's talk about some of the good ones. Director's Cut. This one re-rolls the boss blind, and this one can be a real lifesaver. Every ante you should be looking ahead to what the boss blind is, and whether it's got the power to trump your entire build. The example I mentioned earlier is if you can play only one hand or one type of hand, and you really need your card sharp to trigger. Being able to re-roll an unfavorable boss blind is certainly worth the $10. Hieroglyph. At the expense of a permanent reduction in the amount of hands you have, this voucher takes you back one ante. And this can be quite useful late in the run to give you more time to level up your scaling cards and to give you a better chance for the higher antes, but be careful because you might be putting yourself in a worse position if you use it too early in the run. For example, if you use it in ante 5, you might actually end up with fewer hands to level up your jokers than if you just kept going, because you will lose one hand per blind. So I would only use it earlier than ante 6 if you're really struggling or if you have the extra hand voucher. Seed money. If you're money dependent, for example, you got the bull joker or an expensive multi-card, spending $10 on this voucher will raise the interest cap to $50. So now you can earn an extra $5 per round from interest. Wasteful. This gives you an extra discard and can work really well with certain jokers like the banner, castle joker, delayed gratification, or the blackboard, getting you more money, the ability to level up, or chances to clear your hand. Telescope. This is somewhat useful in that the celestial packs will always have the card for your most used poker. Alongside Constellation and Supernova, this becomes really useful, allowing you to keep leveling up high card so that it becomes the only hand you ever need. The other vouchers can be useful, but they are much more run specific, and some can even be detrimental. For example, having a larger hand can make triggering the blackboard joker harder. Let's talk about tarot cards now. Tarot cards can be really useful over time. They can upgrade individual cards so they get buffs to chips or multi, or even your jokers. While jokers remain the most important, I'd use my money on tarot cards second. If you enhance enough cards, you can unlock the driver's license joker, which is a great multi joker of 3x. Spectral cards are a bit weird. They're like broader tarot cards, but they also come with some pretty serious trade-offs. And generally, I don't buy them unless I'm just throwing the money around. They're not needed in this guide, but can come in handy every once in a while. Right, let's talk about planet cards. These level up your poker hands, and this can be useful, but on their own, they're not going to be able to make much of a difference. And I only really recommend upgrading the lower rank hands, or maybe flush on the first couple of antes. Other than that, I'd kind of avoid them unless you got spare cash or the Constellation Joker, and even then I'd stick to high card, pair or 2-pair. If you've got the Square Joker, definitely don't use your planet cards to upgrade hands which take more than 5 cards to play. Remember, all consumables supplement your run. Jokers make your run. You can win without consumables, you cannot win without jokers. Lastly, let's quickly talk about money. Money is important to manage, and more money can easily improve your odds in a less direct way through packs. You should try to max out your interest cap and then always spend everything above that amount, because why not, right? Even if you have to spend it on rerolls, just spend it. That is, of course, unless you got something like the Bull Joker, in which case there actually is an incentive to save your money. Anywho, with all of that out of the way, we have all of the building blocks to have a successful run. Let's put all the pieces together now and discuss a general walkthrough. In the first ante, our goals are simple. We want to get a decent multiplier and we want to get some cash. Ideally, we'll want to be winning these first blinds in 1 or 2 hands. For the first round, we can win this in 1 hand if we get a decent flush. The cards in our flush need to score for 40 or higher, so that's an average of 8 per card. What I suggest you do is sort by suit, then look at your hand and see for which suits you have the highest cards, hopefully faces and aces. Then keep discarding the rest of your cards until you can get a decent flush. Again, you need it to be worth 40 or more. If you see something like a high run, by all means go for that, but don't feel like you need to settle for something as low as a 2-pair or similar. It's really not the end of the world if it takes more than 2 hands to win this one, but we will get $1 extra if you can do it first time. When we get to the shop, we need to start implementing our strategy. And first, we need to prioritize getting a decent multi-joker, and then a decent flat chip joker. Always spend your money here on jokers and buffoon packs. Do not spend your money on anything else. If we don't manage to get any decent jokers by the end of Ante 2, then we're in serious trouble. Now, while we're looking for jokers, do not skip the blinds. Except under really exceptional circumstances, skipping is worse than playing. A good example of when we might want to skip is if we already have a decent flat multi and the baseball card joker. If the skip will give us a free uncommon joker, this will level up our baseball card joker and might be worth the risk. However, again, in most circumstances, don't skip. We need the cash and the opportunity to buy more jokers. Now, in the first blinds themselves, keep playing for high flushes and you should be fine. Once we have a decent flat chip and multi-joker, we can probably get away with playing lower poker hands, even high cards. The next part of our plan is to further increase our cash and to get some scalings. This is when we'll be looking to get the Square Joker or the Castle Joker or the Ride the Bus or the Green Joker, as well as some money jokers like Delayed Gratification. Once we do, level them up either by playing hands or whatever it is that they need to level up. Now, it's time to spend money and supplement your run. Do this carefully, and if you get the Bull Joker, always spend less than you make. This is the time to get a decent multi joker if available. If they're not available, buy Arcana packs, level up your deck. If they're not available, buy Celestial packs, level up your poker hands. However, if you don't have the hologram or blue joker, I would probably prioritize buying a decent voucher before buying standard packs for the sake of it. And with that, honestly, you should now have everything you need to beat a run for the first time. The only thing that's going to stop you now is a boss blind. Once you reach a new ante, always look ahead to see what the boss blind is. If it's something that's really going to derail you, see if you can skip a blind to reroll it, or whether the director's cut voucher is available. If not, well then you've got 2 blinds to see what changes you can make. Look, sometimes luck is just not on your side. When it comes to the finisher boss blinds on Ante 8, there are some which are going to be no problem whatsoever, and others which might cause us serious difficulties. The Cerulean Bell is probably the easiest to deal with. It forces one card to be selected, but you do have the option to discard it rather than actually play it, which helps. The Verdant Leaf is probably the next easiest. This will debuff all cards until a Joker is sold. But if you've got good enough Jokers to make it to Ante-A, to be honest, you don't need to sell anything and you'll still probably win. The Violet Vessel is tricky as you'll need to score 300,000 in order to win. And you're really going to need to have a decent multi-multi here, otherwise it's going to be game over. However, if you've got a 4x multi-multi, this should not be any problems whatsoever. It's the Amber Acorn and the Crimson Heart which pose the most issues. With the Amber Acorn, your Jokers are flipped and shuffled, and this can cause serious issues if you're relying on a multi-multi. Again, the order of your Jokers matters, and if you move a multi-multi to the left-hand side, you might seriously reduce your score. The good news is that you can move your Jokers still, and once you play your first hand, have a look at their effects. This should tell you where your Jokers are and you can adjust them accordingly, in which case the only downside is that you potentially miss out on a single hand. If you don't have a multi-multi, this is probably one of the easiest bosses in the game, as all the flipping and shuffling shouldn't really affect you. The Crimson Heart is the one that scares me the most. It disables a random Joker every hand, and I would avoid this one if you can, especially if you're relying on 1 or 2 very important Jokers out of your 5. Look, at the end of the day, there's always going to be some luck involved, so even if you do everything right, the game still might screw you over. But hopefully, you now have everything you need to beat a run for the first time. I wish you the very best of luck. Please let me know how you do and whether this guide helped. That's it from me. Thank you ever so much for watching. I will see you next time. Take care, guys.